Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Gay Street Studios on this, for me anyway, it's a very nice Monday afternoon. I guess you'll be seeing this on Wednesday. Looking at a little bit of rain between now and then. And we're finishing up Wallace Stevens today. And you remember last time we made it through the first 6 stanzas of this great poem, Sunday Morning, a poem that takes us from an old Sunday to a new Sunday. And we're approaching that new Sunday, which comes at stanza 8, which we'll talk about today. But first, stanza 7. So let me just give you a little bit of language on that. And as I've been doing, I think I'll kind of alternate between my notes and then the reading of the actual, the text itself, and then back to the notes, etc., and then can create some improvised associations as well along the way. Hopefully, matching at least to some degree what happens in the regular classroom. Okay, so stanza 7, a little language on that. This is the penultimate stanza of the poem, the second to last stanza of the poem, and it imagines a ritual. The lines, you'll notice, are rendered in the future tense, which lends the ritual and its consequences a certain inevitability. In other words, this will happen. This will come to pass. And along with that, certain inevitability that's intimated in the grammar of the language itself, in the tenses of the language itself. Along with that, there's also a kind of prophetic quality. That is, it's as if the speakerly voice of the poem, Stevens, the speakerly voice of the poem is imagining a future that will come to pass, or imagining a future that he hopes will come to pass. But along with that prophetic quality, it sets the poem in a powerfully ambiguous chronological location. In other words, the poem takes place, chronologically speaking, in either a pre-Christian past, in other words, a deeply pagan, quote unquote, I've told you I hate that word, but we never use that word about our own mythic traditions. Your pagan, what pagan means is before us. So in a pagan pre-Christian past, or could also be taking place in a post-Christian future. Another way of putting that, the scene invokes a sense of, this is important now, the scene invokes the sense of the holy that we've lost, or a sense of the holy we're capable of attaining, or both. The participants celebrate the living presence. And I'm thinking, I emphasize the word presence that way because I'm thinking of the word presence chronologically, in other words, present tense, the nowness of the ritual and its consequences, pardon me. The nowness of the ritual, but also the everywhereness of the ritual. It is occurring to us now. We are participating in it now, and it is everywhere around us in that now. It is ubiquitous in its presence. You see, it is present in its presence. So the participants celebrate the living presence of the Son. And then line 94, quoting here, not as a God, but as a God might be, the Son, worshiped, if you will, celebrated, not as a God, but as a God might be. So these participants, the implication is, bear witness to an idea of God not yet imagined, or an idea of God that the poem itself is in the process of imagining, an idea of God rooted organically in human experience, human biological experience, human environmental experience, human social experience, human sexual experience, and mystically, human spiritual experience, as though the natural world, the biological world, the botanical world, the environmental world, the social world, the sexual world, the psychological world, all contributing, all infusing this holy moment, this moment that's experienced as sacred by its participants. In other words, a moment of spiritual mysticism. This is not a doctrinal moment. This is not an ecclesiastical moment. This is not a churched moment. This is a moment in which the institutional limitations of conventional religious practice, of conventional theological belief are left behind. And there's a more powerful form of the holy, of the sacred, being communicated, being lived. In their ritual chanting, they give voice not only to their own celebration of its presence, the Son's presence, the Son witnessed not as a God, but as a God might be. It's potential. So they give voice not only to their own celebration of the Son's presence, which makes the Son, I'm tempted to say the Son / the God's presence, which makes their world a heaven, a paradise. Stevens uses the word. But to the features of this heaven, the features of this paradise, the features of this heaven earth, which the Son has literally made possible. The Son / as God, literally having biologically made the earth possible, and the Son / God conceptually or spiritually having made this place a paradise by offering to the inhabitants of this place this holy moment. Okay. These participants bear witness to an idea of the transcendent and eternal, an idea of the transcendent and eternal, inextricable from the immanent and mortal, inextricable from blood and earth and sex and death, inextricable, in other words, from life itself and all of life's constituent elements. Let's look at the actual language of the poem of this great stanza, stanza 7. Excuse me. Looks like some clouds are coming in. Stanza 7. Supple and turbulent, a ring of men. Shall men here, not in the sense of masculine, but men here in the sense of the human. Stephen's writing this poem in 1922. He would have chosen another noun, I think, in 2021, a more appropriate noun, a more inclusive noun. But just so you know. Supple and turbulent, a ring of men shall change. There's that shell, right? So there's that future, that prophetic future, that future that locates us ambiguously, either in the past or in the future at some point, in the future at some point. Supple and turbulent. A ring, very sensuous words, especially when you hit that word orgy, in the second line, supple, turbulent, and you realize what you're looking at. This is a sexual moment as well as a spiritual moment. I think we can't leave that behind. I mean, I think part of Stephen's sense of the holy includes the sexual. It includes our biological selves, our sense. Remember, he says poetry is read with the nerves. Our sexual selves are included in Stephen's sense of the holy. Our sensual selves are included in Stephen's sense of the sacred, right? I think I mentioned my favorite Oscar Wilde quote. He's got so many. I'm paraphrasing. Anybody that thinks the body is distinct from the soul, has neither. Stevens would have agreed with Wilde. Wilde, of course, writing not too long before Stevens. Wilde imprisoned because of his homosexuality. Years taken away from him, and work taken away from us. It was illegal to be gay in England. Well, I have to check my dates on this, but well past the middle of the 20th century. It's illegal. I think it's around 1970. I knew the date at one point. You have to forgive me. You guys can check on that. Supple and turbulent, and that's why it's so important to recognize our sexuality as an expression as a beautiful expression of our humanity, no matter where on that beautiful spectrum of human gender, that beautiful spectrum of human sexuality, no matter where it takes place, no matter from what source it issues, we have to be able to include it in our sense of meaning. Supple and turbulent, a ring of men shall chant in orgy on a summer morn their boisterous devotion to the sun. That word boisterous, wonderful word, boisterous, reminds me of that. You remember in High-Toned Old Christian Woman, that tink a tank tunk, that jovial hullabaloo that the disaffected flagellants whip from themselves. Remember that line? Allow, madam, our jovial, your disaffected flagellants whipping from themselves a joyful hullabaloo among the spheres, such tink, tank, a tunk, and so on. That's boisterous, right? Shall chant in orgy on a summer morn their boisterous devotion to the sun, not as a god, but as a god might be, naked among them like a savage source. but as a God might be. And you could read that as, and is not now, not naked among them now. Not as a God, but as a God might be, naked among them like a savage source. Their chant, now, notice chant is introduced in the second line of the poem, right? Um, and the character of the chant is expanded upon, and then in line 96, the chant is invoked again, syllogistically, Stephen's step by step, extrapolating upon, elucidating his meanings here, linking them one to the other recursively as we move through the work, just like a good essay, right? Syllogistic. Their chant shall be, note the plural, their chant shall be in a putative future. It's one interpretation. Their chant shall be a chant of paradise. So the assertion is this moment in which those elements that we mentioned earlier are invoked in this admixture of the biological, of the botanical, of the natural, of the sexual, of the psychological, of the social. That moment, that holy moment, makes this earth a paradise. Now you think of the implications of that word, a heaven, eternal plenitude. Eternal plenitude. Their chant shall be a chant of paradise, out of their blood, returning to the sky. I like that, returning, as if that's where it was once, which of course it was once. Returning to the sky. Of course, it's the chant that's returning to the sky, carrying the blood with it. Their chant shall be a chant of paradise, out of their blood, their chant returning to the sky. And in their chant, notice the repetition of that word chant. It's almost an incantation, a chant, an incantation in itself. It's a canticle, it's a song, right? With that word repeated again and again and again. Along with the word shall. Look, you have those four powerful shalls in this stanza, if I'm counting them correctly. And in their chant shall enter, voice by voice, the windy lake, wherein their Lord delights, their Lord, small l, the sun. So in their chant, that moment of human expression, that incantation, that prayer, if you will, that deeply human song of prayer, that incantation, that chant, in their chant shall enter voice by voice. So these are the elements that the human chant enables to join it. In their chant shall enter voice by voice the windy lake, wherein their Lord delights, the trees like seraphim, and echoing hills that choir, chant, incantation, song, that choir among themselves long afterward. Isn't that just such wonderful lines? So the windy lake, the voice of the windy lake, wherein their Lord delights, and of course, what is the evidence of the delight of their Lord in the lake? What is the evidence of that delight? The reflection on the sun on the surface, on the mottled and coruscating, scintillating surface of the lake. And there's the sun delighting in it in reflection. Right? That word reflection is so great because it implies the cognitive, doesn't it? As well as the visual. Um, In their chant shall enter voice by voice the windy lake, wherein their world or their Lord delights. The trees, like seraphim angels, so the trees become angels, and a choir is building here, and echoing hills. Right, the hills echo, become part of the incantation that choir among themselves long afterward. So you feel in the human chant, the natural, biological, environmental elements become holy and join in the incantation, become one with the human, and the human becomes one with them. They shall know well the heavenly fellowship of men that perish and of summer morn. So the human beings experience deeply shall know well. Experience deeply the spiritual interconnectedness that they conjure together in this incantation, in this incantatory moment. They experience each other in their sociality. Do you see? They experience each other in their sexuality. They experience each other in their love for one another, in their fellowship with one another, their friendship with one another. They shall know well the heavenly fellowship. That word heavenly, right? So we've seen the word paradise and we see the word heavenly here. You know, Stevens is insisting the world is being made a heaven in these spiritual moments, generated by human awareness of their power and by human expression of their power in the incantation. And isn't it true, y'all? You start to see this poem itself is one such incantation that makes our world a paradise. The poem itself is a kind of scripture. The poem itself is a kind of holy chorus, non-institutional, unchurched, subversive of churched traditions, subversive of the institutionalization of the holy, subversive of the churching of the sacred. You've felt moments like this, those of you who've traveled, those of you who hike, those of you who have come into contact with nature in these moments. These are more and more difficult moments, aren't they? Because we've taken more and more of this sublime elements of nature away from ourselves due to the way that we've chosen to devastate the environment. But they're still available to us, these moments. And they're also, this is also a moment of, if I may, it's a moment of art. I mean, that chant is art. That chant is an incantation. That chant is a poem. That chant is a song. That chant is a novel. That chant is an act of theater, isn't it? It's an act of theater. That chant is a film. A holy moment of human expression. The moment made holy by the expression. And then these great two last lines. And whence they came, that is where they came from, where it all started, and whither they shall go, where it's all going to end up. Those looming questions, right? Where did we come from? Where are we going? those looming existential questions, those points of scientific, religious, and philosophical inquiry. Who are we? Where did we come from? Where are we going? Those points of prophecy, those points of speculation, right? Those two looming questions, and whence they came and whither they shall go. Those issues in philosophy, those issues in cosmology, those issues in science, those issues in the arts, those issues in theology, and whence they came and whither they shall go, the dew upon their feet shall manifest. You want the answer to those looming philosophical questions? The dew upon their feet shall manifest those answers. Questions regarding our origins, questions regarding our destinies will be crystallized, will be manifest, will be crystallized in present, actual human experience, not theological speculation, not scientific examination. Wonderful line. Let me just give you that language again. And whence they came and whither they shall go, the dew upon their feet shall manifest. So questions, looming questions regarding our origins, looming questions regarding our destinies will be crystallized, will be manifest in present, actual human experience, not theological speculation, not scientific investigation. Here, now. Okay, so it takes us to stanza 8. Let me get a drink. How are we doing on time? Okay. Stanza 8. I'm just going to work through this. This is kind of a couple of different sections at work here in this wonderful stanza. In stanza 8, we arrive at a new Sunday. We arrive at a new notion of the holy. We arrive at a new proposition regarding the nature of paradise. So in the first lines 106 through 109, so the first 4 lines of the poem, we are returned to the woman we are introduced to, we've moved away from the recent stanzas, right? We return to the woman, our partner in dialectic, right? The woman that whose initial experience catalyzed the investigation of the poem, right? In that first stanza, what happens to the woman cognitively, emotionally, spiritually, what happens to the woman in stanza 1 catalyzes the inquiry that the poem represents, catalyzes the dialectic, then a little bit later, the question and answer, the issue, and then the issue posed by the woman, and then the issue and the in question form, literally in question form, and then the answer posed by the speakerly voice of the poem. And it continues, right? So we're back to the woman. Of course we are. I mean, that's dialectic. And you know that Stevens is going to return to that. And that's the way syllogism works. It's the conclusion. Again, it's like it's the 5-paragraph essay. It's the way syllogism works. It's developmental logic, just like your composition professors told you about. So we return to the woman, our partner in dialectic. She realizes in these first lines, these initial 5 lines, or 4 lines, she realizes that after the crucifixion of Jesus, no literal, no actual resurrection took place. Let me just give you the lines there. So the first 4 lines. She hears upon that water without sound. Now we know that water without sound. So we're taken back to the first stanza. I mean, it's as though she's, we're taken back to her room, right? Overlooking the water. We're taken back to line 10 in the first stanza. We're taken back to line 11 in the first stanza. So we're right back there. She hears upon that water without sound, that of course Stevens has very carefully associated with death and that old catastrophe and the sort of the logic of self-sacrifice to overcome death, which is what launched this into this countervailing investigation, this countervailing proposition regarding the nature of the holy, a countervailing proposition subversive to the conventional. She hears upon that water without sound a voice that cries, "The tomb in Palestine is not the porch of spirits lingering. It is the grave of Jesus, where he lay." Period. Okay. So it's a realization. It's a reality principle. And from there, the stanza elaborates upon this realization and concludes the poem's logic. Our lives are lived without any inherent, essential, or imposed order. Let me just say that again. Our lives, let me read the line. We live in an old chaos of the sun. Our lives are lived without any inherent, essential, or imposed order. We are unprotected, unendorsed, and unauthorized. We are unauthorized by a conventionally conceived higher power. We are alone with only each other for succor, and we cannot escape death. Let me just look at the language here. Pardon me. We live in an old chaos of the sun, or old dependency of night and day, or island solitude, unsponsored, free of that wide water, inescapable. Let's read that again. She hears upon that water without sound a voice that cries, "The tomb in Palestine is not the porch of spirits lingering. It is the grave of Jesus where he lay." We live in an old chaos of the sun, or old dependency of day and night, or island solitude, unsponsored, free of that wide water, inescapable. That wide water, which Stevens has very clearly associated with that old catastrophe and our mortality generally, right? The fact of death, the ineluctable fact of death, part and parcel of our humanity. He says, I'll give you term language. Then in the final 7 lines of the poem, lines 114 through 120, he says, our joys our meanings, our paradise, our eternity must reside only in the vivid, living instances of startling spontaneity, enchanting ambiguity, and wild ripeness, which our world bestows to our attentive, yearning, striving selves as we glide resistlessly but elegantly, powerfully, courageously toward death. And the elegance of that glide downward is our triumph and our grace. Let me just give you that language again. I know it's a lot to take in. Our joys, our meanings, our paradise, our eternity must reside only in the vivid, living instances of startling spontaneity. And this language is matched to the details of these final lines. Okay. In other words, it's not meant as abstraction. It's meant as to be directly associated with the actual language in the lines. Our joys, our meanings, our paradise, our eternity must reside only in the vivid, living instances of startling spontaneity, enchanting ambiguity, and wild ripeness, which our world bestows to our attentive, yearning, striving selves as we glide resistlessly but elegantly, powerfully, and courageously toward death. The elegance of that glide downward is our triumph and our grace. Now let's look at the language. Let me get a drink here. These beautiful final lines. Yeah, I'm just going to back up to 110, line 110. We live in an old chaos of the sun, or old dependency of day and night, or island solitude, unsponsored, free, of that wide water, inescapable. Deer walk upon our mountains, and the quail whistle about us their spontaneous cries. Sweet berries ripen in the wilderness, and in the isolation of the sky, at evening, casual flocks of pigeons make ambiguous undulations as they sink downward to darkness on extended wing. And that extended wing is our glide downward, full of elegance toward death. And it's in that extension that we find our grace, that we find our courage, that we find our beauty, and that above all, I think we find the holiness of our humanity and the holiness of our world. Just going through this language a little more, with a little more of a fine-tooth comb here. So deer walk upon our mountains, as opposed to, the bare mountains of paradise, where there is no death, and there can be no life without death. Deer walk upon our mountains, and the quail whistle about us their spontaneous cries. Sweet berries ripen in the wilderness, as opposed to never ripen in that perfect heaven that Stevens describes with tongue firmly in cheek in stanza 6 lines 77 to 78, right? That is there no change of death in paradise? Does ripe fruit never fall? Or do the boughs hang always heavy in that perfect sky, unchanging, yet so like our perishing earth, with rivers like our own, that seek for seas they never find? So sweet berries ripen in the wilderness, and the wilderness, as opposed to some kind of domesticated order, right? The wilderness, same wilderness that's surrounding the jar that's placed in Tennessee. Sweet berries ripen in the wilderness, and in the isolation of the sky, there's that aloneness, right? And that is chimes with our island solitude, doesn't it? In line, what's that? Line 112. Island solitude. And in the isolation of the sky at evening, casual flocks of pigeons make ambiguous. We're not entirely sure what they mean. We're just sure that when we see them, we, in a flash, understand spontaneously the grace that we are surrounded by and the grace of which we are capable here, now, among us. At evening, casual flocks of pigeons make ambiguous undulations as they sink downward to darkness on extended wings. So we move toward death. Our triumph rests in the grace and equipoise and dignity with which we embrace that journey. Art Tatum. One evening, Fats Waller was playing in a New York club when he heard a stir in the audience. A large, heavy man was making his way among the tables. Waller stopped playing. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I just play the piano, but God is in the house." Then he left the piano bench so that Art Tatum could take over. Tatum was the most admired, most imitated pianist of his generation, but he was always something of a mystery, even during his lifetime. He was born in Toledo, Ohio in 1909, totally blind in one eye and very near sightless in the other. He began picking out tunes at home at 3, was playing hymns in church at 5, and trying to imitate the piano rolls his mother brought home for him to hear. According to his neighbor, the singer John Hendricks, he even mastered one lightning-fast duet, not knowing it had taken 4 hands to record the original. He had a memory for melody so photographic that he rarely had to hear a tune more than once to play it back with embellishments, and an ear for pitch so uncanny he could tell the denomination of a coin dropped on a table by the sound it made. By the age of 17, he was working in small Ohio clubs and dazzling visiting musicians with his artistry. When they urged him to come to New York, he would back off, saying he wasn't good enough yet. But by the time the arranger Don Redman came through Toledo in 1931, okay, Don Redman from the Fletcher Henderson band, if you remember that earlier, he was one of the band members. He did the arrangements for Henderson, and then later for Ellington, and later for a number of other, for Basie, a number of other big bands. Don Redman came through Toledo in 1931. The young man felt ready. "Tell them New York cats to look out," he told Redman. "Here comes Tatum." He got to New York the following year as an accompanist to the singer Adelaide Hall, but he stayed on as a soloist. and according to legend, soon found himself being challenged by the three most respected pianists in town, James P. Johnson, Willie the Lion Smith, and Fats Waller. They met at a Harlem club called Morgan's. Each one played a favorite number. Each time, Tatum outplayed him. He was just too good, Waller remembered. He had too much technique. When that man turns on the powerhouse, don't no one play him down. When that man turns on the powerhouse, don't no one play him down. And I love that coming off of Wallace Stevens. It's almost as though someone did that intentionally. God is in the house. And that's Stephen's message too. God is in the house. Art Tatum, St. Louis Blues.